Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much for inviting me to the Frontline Club. My name's John Sopel. I present a programme called The Politics Show on BBC One every Sunday, and I present on News 24, and nothing like as much as George Galloway probably does for the media. There's an easy template for these kind of things. You rattle off what the Americans would call the timeline on a man's career, and away you go. So it seems we could do this the really boring way. We could just say that he grew up in Dundee, joins a charity, becomes involved in politics, becomes an MP. That's it. Oh yeah, and he travels a bit. And that could be George Galloway's career on one level, or you could go into the colour, the texture, the odd controversy maybe. George Galloway was involved in twinning Dundee with Nablus. That was not a kind of common thing to do at the time. Had a bit of a run-in over his expenses when he was at War on Want. He unseats Roy Jenkins as MP in Glasgow Hillhead, and it was fast became clear that this was one of the fieriest orators, slickest interviewees, brilliant communicators of his generation, but never could be accused of being a conformist or straightforward careerist. He was booted out of the Labour Party, founded the Respect Party, unseats one of New Labour's rising stars in the East End. He's won libel damages from the Telegraph, torn a bunch of US senators to shreds, and has recently faced criticism from the charity commissioners. I could go on like this for hours. Now, some have accused him of smugness, arrogance, vanity, like the cat that got the cream. And on one occasion, of course, he was quite literally the cat that got the cream following a certain television appearance. And then there's the whole subject of Iraq, which I suspect will dominate quite a lot of our discussion this evening. Now, as a broadcaster, I always balk when I see on a script or on auto cue a really difficult word that you think you're going to trip over. So, George Galloway, I salute you for being able to say indefatigability.
Thank you very much.
Because it's a mighty word. Does he arouse strong emotions? You bet he does. Actually, I was in Edinburgh yesterday doing an event, and I thought, what am I going to say at the forward to this particular thing? And I was literally looking at the airport in mid-distance, and I see the Scottish Daily Record. MP George beaten up by airport yachts. So it's not only American senators who want to get their hands on him, it's not only Westminster politicians who want to take him apart, even Glasgow, some of Glasgow Rangers supporters, I think they were, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. It sounded thoroughly unpleasant. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, George Galloway, the MP for Bethnal Green and Bow.
Thank you very much.
You like a fight?
Well, I was a boxer when I was young, and one of the things I was just saying in Glasgow when I was rudely interrupted by, this is how lucky I am in life. There was a group of 26 orange walkers who'd flown from Glasgow to London for the London Orange Walk. Now, not many people even knew there was a London Orange Walk, but lucky White Heather, they were on my plane going to Glasgow, and it was an emerald green rag to an orange bull. But one of the things I was saying in that performance I did in Glasgow on Sunday night was that in front of the Senate, I had a kind of boxing experience. There comes a point when you're in the boxing ring where you see in the other fellow's eyes, or occasionally he can see in yours, that you no longer want to be there, and that you're hoping the bell's going to ring, or that you can climb out of the ropes. And that look was on Norman Coleman's eyes. I do fight, but I don't like to fight. I would prefer if everybody agreed with how I see things. But if they don't, then I have to fight to win that. And when you're against the wind, John, which is mostly what I've been, although the wind has begun to change on Palestine and on Iraq and other things, when you're against the wind, you kind of have no option but to struggle.
But isn't there another way of doing political dialogue that is less confrontational, that is less personal, that is less...
Maybe.
Christopher Hitchens, who you described as a drink-soaked former Trotskyist popinjay.
Which was wrong? Which of these epithets is wrong? I actually said bloated, drink-soaked former Trotskyist popinjay.
I didn't do the quote justice.
No, you're right, because they've mainly trimmed the word bloated, I think, because most of the journalists doing the writing are themselves bloated, but as well as drink soaked. No, Christopher Hitchens turned up eating a banana in a white suit with a large Kurdish flag about this breadth, and proceeded to bombastically intrude while I was doing interviews with other media. And so I just said the first thing that came into my mind, which was bloated, drink-soaked, former Trotskyist popinjay, all of which I knew him to be.
But do you think that...
But I think the point is...
No, serious point about...
The point is nonetheless a good one. I am perfectly capable, and have done in many parts of my life, of getting along with people that politically I don't agree with. I've travelled overseas with opposition members of parliament, people who I profoundly disagree with, and gotten along perfectly civilly with them. But when you're at the front line in politics, and when you take a view which is against the prevailing orthodoxy, inevitably you're attacked, and I'm one of these people that when attacked I attack back. It's probably not the best way to be always, but you can't change your personality. I mean, I'm a combative person. I feel passionately about the things I believe in, and I can't kind of strip that passion out.
You see, Tony Benn is now a great national institution, and there was a period where, you know, some of the things that are said of you were said of him.
Yeah.
And he seemed to do things in a certain... I mean, it may have been disingenuous, it may have been false, but he did things in a certain courteous way, and yet you knew that he was sort of being true to his principles, whether it be on Europe, whether it be on, you know, reforms to the Labour Party or whatever.
No, that's true. He has become a national treasure, but then he is 83. If I live to be 83, I might myself become a national treasure, who knows. But I think that's right. Mr. Benn has been my political inspiration for at least 30 years. And at least 30 years ago, I heard him say, when attacked, "My old father used to say, never wrestle with a chimney sweep because you can't come out clean." I occasionally say that until somebody wrote to me recently saying, "It's extraordinary that both you and Mr. Benn had fathers who said, never wrestle with a chimney sweep."
Yeah, it's always dangerous to nick someone else's story, isn't it?
Might you have the same father?
But just the way, you know, you say you get on with other backbenchers. When you became a backbench MP, you were elected for Glasgow Hill Head, how did you see it? How did you see it developing? Because I suspect that most backbench MPs think, well, I could become a parliamentary private secretary, I can then become a parliamentary secretary, I'll then rise to Minister of State, I get a cabinet post, and I'm there at the seat of power. Was there ever a moment where you thought that's my career path, or did you think, I'm always an outsider?
No, there was a moment, but long before I was elected to Parliament. I was, as I've just said, close to Mr. Benn when he was vying for power in the Labour Party. He had promised me a job if he had won the deputy leadership, because I was a Labour Party organiser then, between 1977 and 1983. So I was already on the staff of the Labour Party. He had said to me that if he won the deputy leadership, I would move to London, I would work in his office. I might then have got a seat in 82 rather than 87. Or was it 83, the election? 83 rather than 87. If he'd been the deputy leader, he might have become the leader. If he'd become the leader, undoubtedly I would have been amongst the front bench people with him. By the time I got elected to Parliament, the wind had decisively changed. And others who thought like me or were well to the left of me changed with it. But I never did. John Reid I knew as a hardline communist. He says now, well, I used to believe in Santa Claus too, but not when you're 32 with a PhD. Alistair Darling I first saw pressing Trotskyite tracts on bewildered railwaymen at Waverley Station during a strike. Stephen Byers I knew when he was in the Militant. Alan Milburn I knew when he was in the International Marxist Group. He had a bookshop called Days of Hope, which was otherwise known as Haze of Dope. None of this is libelous. It's veritas is the defence to all of it. So they changed, and I didn't change. So by the time I got to Parliament, I suppose I'm saying I knew that I would never be on the front bench.
And just going back to the Daily Record, sorry. I mean, inevitably, before the words George Galloway, it says Maverick MP George Galloway. And I know you hate that, don't you?
I do. I hate
you
the
hate
word
Maverick, outspoken.
No, I don't. Outspoken's fine. I'll tell you why I hate the word maverick, John. Although literally in the dictionary definition sense it merely means an unbranded steer. In other words, a cow that doesn't belong to anyone. That, in its literal meaning, it's not bad. But what it tends to mean in popular parlance is an unpredictable person. A person who might do this today but might do something very different tomorrow. But that actually isn't the case with me. My views are entirely consistent, one with the other, and over many, many decades. I've been in politics since I was a child, and therefore that's 40 years or more. And my views haven't changed in that time. And each of my views is consistent one with the other, and therefore I don't like the word maverick. But outspoken, radical, left-wing, controversial, all these epithets are entirely justified.
Okay. Can we just do a couple of news lines? Because there was the Charity Commissioner's report last week, and I don't think you've done an interview. Have you? You didn't do an interview on the day?
No.
So?
Because it was a souffle being asked to rise yet again, I suppose. And I'd already said all I had to say about it. But sure, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
That's a
Thatcherite.
That's a Thatcherite quote. Maggie Thatcher said in her last speech in Bournemouth, and anyone knows you can't make a souffle rise twice.
Exactly so.
George Galloway stealing from Margaret Thatcher. So, having got that out of the way, the Charity Commissioner said there were improper transactions.
Well, they said that the money had been properly spent.
Yeah.
They said that we should have inquired more closely as to the source of the income. That would have been very difficult to do. The second biggest donor, third biggest donor to the Mariam Appeal was the Saudi royal family. And as we're discovering in the case of the British aerospace, it's not easy to probe the finances of the Saudi royal family. And if when the now King of Saudi Arabia said to me, we'll pay for the little girl's operation in Glasgow and all her medical treatment, I'd said, well, can you please tell me how you got the money? He probably would have said, well, you're not getting it now, in which case the girl might be dead. Or he might have, I don't know, thrown me in a dungeon dark, as there are a few in Saudi Arabia. I make the point that way because it's a stupid thing to say. If people, when they're having money donated to their campaign, are to investigate how the person giving them the money earned it, well, the Labour Party would be bankrupt for a start. Lakshmi Mittal, the steel magnate, was revealed in the Sunday Times this week to be employing slave labour. Should Labour give the money back?
Are you saying it doesn't? Well, quite possibly.
But they won't.
Well, I mean, the Liberal Democrats are going through a funding thing at the moment where someone has been, charged and whatever else.
Yeah, but they're not giving the money back.
They're not yet. There was the money that came to the Tory party from Athol Nadir. Don't you, if you are a public figure and you are doing something controversial, which Mr. Galloway, you are invariably doing, seriously, George, you are kind of quite often controversial. Don't you need to know where the money comes from because of what gets thrown at you?
No, because, well, if I was looking to protect myself, maybe, but I wasn't. I was looking to raise money to save a child's life that was dying of leukemia. I was looking to raise money to try and lift the sanctions on Iraq that were killing an Iraqi child every 6 minutes. I had no benefit in it, as even the Charity Commission has now twice had to concede. In fact, if you're being honest, you'll agree with me that actually it was to my disbenefit. My stand on Iraq gravely damaged me, didn't benefit me in any way. But because the cause was so great, I was only grateful that the King of Saudi Arabia and the King of the United Arab Emirates and a businessman in Jordan were giving the money, because this was an international, global crisis and tragedy, and nobody else. If you look back at the cuts, you won't find many people who were campaigning to lift the sanctions on Iraq. Even though what I said then if it had been heeded, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. If there had been no sanctions, if there had been no war, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. So I feel absolutely vindicated by it.
And in terms of, I saw one newspaper cut last week saying that Sir Philip Moore has completed his investigation. He's what they call charmingly, Commissioner on Parliamentary Standards, the sleaze watchdog, I think, is the journalese title that we give him. That he was completing an inquiry, and it says you were going to see him today or something like that. But the paper's
the committee met today, and I'll see them over the next few weeks. And I can't go into that, but in shorthand I can say I'm sure that the Parliamentary Commissioner will find, as the Charity Commission has now found twice, that none of the money that came to the Mariam Appeal either benefited me personally or was in any way improperly spent.
So no censure there. You're
I don't
confident?
know. I don't know that there won't be censure. What I'm absolutely certain is that the only finding that matters to me is that no one can say I either personally benefited by one thin dime or that this money was improperly spent. Both the Charity Commission inquiries, which were ordered, by the way, by Lord Goldsmith, the man who banned the Serious Fraud Office from the inquiry into the Saudi Arabian billion. You may say, as Richard Littlejohn would, that you couldn't make this up. And there's inquiry after inquiry into me, but we vote in Parliament last night that there should be no inquiry into the war, and Lord Goldsmith, the man who orders the inquiry into me, says there can't be an inquiry into the Ministry of Defence, according to The Guardian today, not BAE, paying £30 million per quarter to a Saudi prince in corruption for an arms deal.
Okay, let's talk about the war. Maybe, I suppose, go through it vaguely chronologically. Do you believe that Tony Blair lied about the reasons for going to war? And let me just kind of qualify that question by saying, is it your view that Tony Blair knew that Saddam Hussein didn't have weapons of mass destruction and just made the whole thing up? Because there was a consensus in the international community, and that was evidenced by what happened in UN Resolution 1441, that everyone thought he did. Or did he just was the whole thing a fabrication?
Well, I think the truth lies somewhere in between those two poles. I think the best phrase I saw, and I forget now who said it, that every question mark was replaced by an exclamation mark, and every possible became a probable, and he became carried away by his own propaganda, which, as you know, in politics, believing your own propaganda is a very dangerous thing. Tony Blair is you know this well as an able biographer of him, Tony Blair is a messianic figure. He's not like Gordon Brown, a kind of plodding policy wonk that calculates to the nth degree whether this should be done or that should be done, and maybe even whether this is in his interest or not. Blair, in one sense, is more likable because he isn't like that. He has messianic ideas that are grand and sweeping, and which I think are dangerous in a world leader, because you start to believe that the world can be reordered by the force of your personality and your beliefs. I had a conversation with him once. This is exclusive. Outside the gentleman's lavatory in the library corridor of the House of Commons, to be precise. Just me and him there. And in the course of predicting everything that actually did turn out in Iraq, I accused him of doing all this to please Bush. And he reacted, it was like a Rory Bremner moment. He said, it's worse than that. I really believe in it. And, I believed him. He really believed in it. The problem was what he believed in was completely wrong.
Well, that's interesting, because then you're saying that actually he wasn't Bush's poodle. He was signed up.
Yeah. I definitely believe he was not Bush's poodle. In fact, the relationship was much more like that of Mrs. Thatcher with Bush's father in relation to Gulf War I. This is not a moment to go wobbly, George. I feel sure that that Tony Blair probably said things like that to George Bush. I really don't think he is the poodle. I have been unkind in the past and said he was the Monica Lewinsky, though I stopped saying that because I said it at the London School of Economics at a packed meeting about a year ago, and Miss Lewinsky was sitting in the 11th row of the audience. No, I don't think he was the poodle. I think he's co-architect, co-author, co-responsible, co-guilty.
Could it have had a different outcome?
I really don't think so. And I know that that's the main line now.
Yes, the plan was wrong for after the invasion. Rumsfeld had only thought about no interest in nation building.
We have moved from a defense of the war and the invasion to a second line of defense. Now, the people who supported the war now say, I mean, even the neocons, even Pearl and others, say it was right to do it, but it was all lost after 72 hours or 7 days or 14 days. I don't believe that either, and I think that that line of defense will soon be overrun. The reality is, in the sea swamp, I call it, the swamp of hatred and bitterness that exists in the Muslim world about Western policy, double standards, injustice, of which Palestine is the heart. I hope we'll come to that. The idea that sending hundreds of thousands of Western soldiers to invade and occupy an Arab Muslim country could possibly work out well is so flawed that you can only imagine the people who concluded it knew nothing about the Arab and Muslim world, which happens to be true. Because if you speak to, I have, you may have also, if you speak to any British diplomat who's served in the Arab world, speak to any Foreign Office official who worked on Arab desks, speak to any intelligence officer, as I have, with experience in the Arab and Muslim world, they will all tell you that they knew that it would end like this. Because the one thing guaranteed to unite all Arab and Muslim opinion, as we should have learned from Suez, is Westerners invading and occupying and seeking to reorder the Arab and Muslim world. It was doomed to failure, and I told Mr. Blair in that conversation outside the lavatory exactly that. If you'll forgive me, just a quick wrap on it. This is what I said to him. Quoting Churchill, the fall of Baghdad will not be the beginning of the end, just the end of the beginning. The Iraqis will fight you with their teeth as if necessary, and for as long as necessary until they've driven you out. You will not be received with rice and flowers. You will be received by drive-by shootings, improvised explosive device. It was the first time he'd ever heard the words improvised explosive device, and it came from me. Suicide bombers, and I told them there's no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but by the end, there'll be thousands of Al-Qaeda in Iraq if you do this.
Okay, interesting point, and I want to pick up on two things there. I just want to spool back. So was Afghanistan wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah?
The method, it should have been a police operation. Should have been a police operation.
How's that?
A special forces operation. Well, bin Laden might have been caught, for one. Instead, bin Laden, if he still exists, doesn't matter really now if he's alive or dead, because the idea of bin Ladenism has been fantastically inflated by the attack from the richest and most powerful countries in the world on the poorest country in the world, a Stone Age country. That's what Afghanistan
Don't you have to deal with failed states?
Yeah, but who made it a failed state? You know, I was the last man standing in the British Parliament. It is important to know this. I was the last man standing in the British Parliament. I told Mrs. Thatcher the night before, or 2 nights before, the fall of Kabul to the so-called Mujahideen, and I'm quoting myself if you'll forgive me, I said, "You have opened the gates for the barbarians, and a long dark night will now descend upon the people of Afghanistan." And I never said a truer word. We made Afghanistan a failed state.
But okay, well then that brings me to the question I want to ask you now about Iraq, which is the second follow-up thought. So what do you do now?
Well, because I always say to that, it's a bit rich asking me now what we do now.
But this is where we are.
Yeah.
But you're a politician. That's entirely what politicians have to do.
Well, if you give me the keys, I'll go into reverse gear. It'll be a frightening turn.
Isn't it the cheapest and easiest political comment to say, I wouldn't have started from here?
Well, I am half Irish, so I'm entitled to say, as the Irishman famously said when asked directions, Oh, I wouldn't have started from here. But I'm saying more positively than that. If you gave me the keys, I know that you won't, or nobody will. If you gave me the keys, here's the U-turn we need to execute. First and foremost, we need to recognize that Palestine is the heart of the matter.
Which Tony Blair would agree with.
Well, he wouldn't really. He would agree.
That's what he says.
He would say so, but he's not prepared to do so. In fact, Mr. Blair, as late as last summer in the war on Lebanon, which, by the way, is what really done for Tony Blair, not Iraq. It was Lebanon that was the last straw that broke the camel's back. He has, throughout, he said on the 10th of March, to be precise, in 2005, and I'm quoting him, Israel has no better friend than this government. Israel has no better friend than this Prime Minister. And for once he was telling the truth. Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown for that matter, are utterly, inveterately, deeply soaked pro-Israel Zionists. And every policy they have followed and will follow comes from that mindset. Instead, what needs to happen, I've just been having a bit of an altercation with someone in Gaza on the phone on my TV show before coming here, which is why I've still got makeup on, by the way. I'm not one of these Glasgow men that wears makeup in the street. There's not many of them. I made the point, I said it so often, John, I'm sure you've even heard me say it, when President Arafat, God rest him, was alive. This deal must be done with Arafat. After Arafat comes the deluge. Deal with Arafat, sign with Arafat, deliver to Arafat, because after him it will become uncontrollable, and it is now utterly uncontrollable, and the genie may never be able to be put back into the bottle. It's yet another example of where I was right and the power was wrong.
Okay, so you've been right on Afghanistan, right on Iraq, right on Israel.
That's not bad. I was right on Ireland.
No.
I was right on Ireland.
Hang on, you were right on Ireland?
Yeah.
Are you giving Blair no credit for Ireland?
I am, but I did it long before him. He was denouncing me.
Come on, he was the guy
denouncing me for marching with Gerry Adams and saying that the Sinn Féin had to be brought into the political process. He denounced me when he was a shadow Labour spokesman.
But at the time, it was probably right because the IRA had not renounced violence at that stage.
But they only were going to renounce violence if you persuaded them that there was a political path to follow. And that's what we ought to have done long before we did. But, John, in fact, Margaret Thatcher started it. In fact, Ted Heath started it in Cheney Walk with Whitelaw and so on. Then Thatcher did it. Then Major did it much more boldly. And then Blair skillfully brought the ship into harbour. And on the day he resigned, I said so on every TV station that wanted to interview me.
Right. So, but let's go back on. So you're right on what would happen. What is the way forward now?
Okay, I started.
What is the way forward on Iraq? First of all,
this is the U-turn. We have to stop treating the Palestinians as the terrorists and start treating them as the victims of terrorism. We must start treating the Zionist state as the perpetrator of terrorism, born of terrorism, visiting terrorism for 40 years, almost the lifetime of many of the people in here, on an unarmed, defenseless Palestinian refugee population and occupied population. We must stop selling weapons to Israel, stop buying weapons from Israel, start applying sanctions on Israel like we did on apartheid South Africa. The only sanction there is on Israel is to force them to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest, which is punishment, I'll agree, but hardly fitting the crime. Instead of America paying for every bullet, bomb, rocket, helicopter, gunship and F-16 fighter that Israel massacres Palestinians with, there has to be a complete and utter cessation of all aid to Israel until it disgorges that which it illegally took 40 years ago last week.
Does Israel have a right to exist?
Well, if you ask me, should it exist, I say it shouldn't have. It's been a disaster for the Jews as well as for everyone else. Does it exist? Yes. Will it continue to exist? Yes. It's not requiring of my recognition. It's a nuclear-armed superpower backed by the world's hyperpower. So it's in no need of my... if you ask me the best solution...
I'm trying to ask you the realpolitik questions, George, which are, not how did we get here and what a bloody mess it is, and if only they'd listened to me in the first place, it would have all been fine. I'm trying to ask you the realpolitik question, is what do you do? Do you say, does Israel have a right to exist? And that's a kind of pretty fun, because that unlocks a lot of other things, doesn't it?
No, honestly. First of all, Hamas and the Arab peace plan that came from Riyadh recognizes Israel. There's no question of recognition. You just don't ask me to
Ismail
recognize
Haniyeh.
it. Haniyeh signed the Arab peace deal, the Arab peace proposal.
There has been no explicit statement from Hamas.
His name's on the paper. He signed it. He signed it, the Palestinian Authority signed it, the National Unity Government signed it. In fact, Rantisi, who they murdered, said it to The Guardian, to Seamus Milne, you can Google it, years before. They promised a 50-year truce and effective objective recognition in that interview with The Guardian. It's a bogus question, if you don't mind me saying so, because Israel will continue to exist whether I like it or not. I happen to think that a tiny piece of land, smaller than a single park in South Africa, the Kruger National Park, should be a single state, not a Jewish state or a Muslim state or an Arab or a Jewish state, but should be a democratic state, where every person, whatever their religion, is equal to the other. When Mandela came out of prison, the Boers went to him and said, can we have a white state in the Orange Free State? He said, no, we don't believe in white states or black states. We just believe in democratic states. So there will be one democratic state in South Africa and everyone will be equal in it. That would be a better solution. But
sure,
if the Jews won't accept that...
We are where we are.
Yeah, if they won't accept it, there'll have to be a partition. But there are minimum conditions for that partition. Those minimum conditions were set out by Arafat in and after Oslo many, many times, and they should have been accepted.
So
like I'll adumbrate them.
Broadly speaking, it is the two-state solution, and ultimately will all come down to Jerusalem.
No, it comes down to the refugees. Jerusalem can be solved, and is less of an intractable problem than the refugees. And here's the rub, and here's where I'll probably part company with you and with many people in the room. The Palestinian state has to be contiguous, that is to say the West Bank and Gaza has to be linked, has to have an Arab border, has to have control over its air and sea, has to be cleared of Zionist settlements and military roads, has to have international guarantees that it will not be perpetually invaded. East Jerusalem must be its capital. All of these things can be fixed. The bone that sticks in the throat, not only of the Zionists, but of the Western states people, and even some Palestinians who would like to sign what Arafat refused to sign, is that all Palestinians have a legal and moral right to return to their homes. This cannot be bargained away by anyone. Now, this is important to me because I came into all this in Lebanon in 1977, 30 years ago. All of my closest Palestinian friends are refugees. They're living in Lebanon or Jordan in camps, or they're scattered as refugees around the world. If they don't have the right to go back to the land from which they were driven, it's not a solution. And these are the minimum conditions for a partition.
Okay, and I suspect that people might want to ask questions on this when we get to it in a few minutes' time, because I'm sure you're all stiff of listening to me. And
I think you're doing well.
No, go back to Iraq then.
Yeah.
So, what would happen now if every American soldier and every British troop just went?
Well, there would be bloody chaos, as there is anyway. There is bloody chaos in Iraq. There will be bloody chaos when the British and Americans withdraw, and the reason for that is that the Americans and the British invaded in the first place.
Okay.
They shouldn't try and blame the Iraqis for it,
No.
as they're now trying to do. Well, you know that they are. Mrs. Clinton said the other day, you know, we gave them this chance and they've blown it. Well, thanks very much, Hillary.
Okay, park that thought, but I'm just interested in what you think it might be a way forward.
Well, the only way forward is to negotiate with the resistance who are fighting them. They know the address of the resistance, they know who are the resistance, they know who the leaders of the resistance are, they know they have in their hands still many of the political leaders of the former regime who will have to be talked with. Just as I predicted to you, John, and I did it to you personally, the day will come when you'll realize that bad as he was, there are worse things than Saddam Hussein. Iraq now is much, much worse than it was under Saddam Hussein, and it's going to be much, much harder to control in the future. In fact, a new generation of jihadists that will spread out across the world are even now being schooled in that crucible in Iraq. But they know who the resistance are. The vast majority of resistance operations in Iraq are carried out by Arab nationalists, not by Al-Qaeda, not by foreigners, not by Islamists even, although there is now a confluence of the Arab nationalist and Islamist trends, and that's another of the great triumphs of our Western policy.
Is what was Yugoslavia, when it was, big Yugoslavia, better off with Milosevic?
No, as a matter of fact, Steve Norris and I were the first people to denounce Milosevic when he cancelled the autonomy in Kosovo. We visited Kosovo when nobody knew whether it was a car or a coronet to be licked. And we denounced that at the time. Milosevic was a very bad leader. But
Saddam was a good one?
No, but what we've got now is much worse. No, Saddam brought the country to disaster, although if you were being honest, you would have to say, well, he did the following things which were good, and he did the following things which were bad, and as I say in my own book, the end result is that the bad much outweighs the good. But it'd be foolish to pretend there was nothing good. No, but a better analogy would be Tito. Was Yugoslavia better off under Tito than it became? Undoubtedly, yes. Yugoslavia was a successful socialist country where the serpents of nationalism were by and large under control. The destruction of Yugoslavia has brought much bad, and there's much bad still to come.
Okay, I want to just throw forward a little bit. We've got Gordon Brown, who you described as a rather plodding policy wonk, I think, if you... Can you envisage any return to the Labour Party?
No, not under Gordon Brown. I know Gordon Brown really well. I have known him for more than 30 years. He sat under my chairmanship on the Labour executive, as did John Reid, who was my employee, and Helen Liddell, who was my employee, who's now the Governor-General in Australia. You see how well they've all done? No, I really don't. As you know, I'm the originator of the phrase that Blair and Brown are two cheeks of the same arse. And I don't really expect anything different to come out of them. The only person who could have made the Labour Party a Labour Party again is Robin Cook, who's no longer with us. And I don't see anybody in the Labour Party at any level who can emerge with the politics that it would require from me. And not just me, I'm a small beer in this. Hundreds of thousands of people have left the Labour Party. When John Smith, God rest him, left the Labour Party, there was 500,000 members. Mr. Blair said he would double it. In fact, he's more than halved it. And the numbers are still falling like a stone. As John Cruddas said the other day, Labour has lost 500 members a week since Tony Blair became leader.
Okay, we could argue statistics here, because I think the Labour Party figures were... Well, anyway.
Maybe.
I mean, I think that what happened was there was an enormous surge in membership when Tony Blair became leader, and it's gone again. To probably where it was pretty much actually when he became leader.
Well,
I think those are
I'm making the mistake of using Mr. Blair's own figures because he said in 1994 that the party had just under 500,000 members and he was going to double it.
Right. So there's no chance. But if
no, what we're trying to do, John, is create a Labour Party. We say every country needs a Labour Party, but Britain no longer has one, and that Labour became New Labour, became non-Labour, and is now anti-Labour, is now the opposite of Labour. So we're trying, just as a Scotsman in East London did in 1894, when Keir Hardie became the first ever Labour MP in Newham, we're trying to make a Labour Party.
Does the Respect Party, which has sort of got its roots in Iraq, does it, if there was some kind of, the British troops come home, Iraq disappears to a certain extent from the political agenda. And I suspect, in terms of news coverage, what do I know, or in terms of the amount of political attention it will get, it will start to subside a bit when Gordon Brown takes over, because it is so personally seen as Tony Blair's war that Gordon Brown may just be able to kind of hope that you park Iraq, yes, there'll be deaths, yes, there'll be destruction, yes, it will be awful, but it won't get the same degree of political attention. And therefore, what's the point of Respect?
Well, first of all, we aren't only an anti-war party, we are a Labour Party. We stand for what Labour used to stand for. We try to appeal to the people Labour used to appeal to, and with some success. I dreamt once of a straight fight between us and Labour in an election. We got one on May the 3rd of this year, just a few weeks ago, in, of all places, Bolsover. And if you think Dennis Skinner was the beast of Bolsover, you haven't seen our councillor in Bolsover. It was a straight fight between Respect and Labour, no other parties, we beat them. And in that straight fight, which is an all-white constituency, by the way, not a black face in the ward, not a Muslim in the ward, we beat Labour, because we stood on Labour policies and they stood on New Labour policies. So we are a Labour Party, we're not just an anti-war party. But the second thing is, John, I think your premise is wrong. Iraq is going to rage as the biggest issue in the world for many, many years to come. Gordon Brown isn't going to withdraw. He said so in Iraq yesterday. And the war's going to get worse, and it's going to spread. And it's going to spread south. And it's going to spread amongst the Shiite Muslims, which is where our soldiers are. A thin red line, 5,500 of them, surrounded by 10 million Shiite Muslims in the south of Iraq. If you think what that will look like, it'll look like Rocks Drift in the film Zulu. But sadly, not with the same happy ending for us.
Okay, there's another prediction. Should we all meet here in 3 years' time and see whether he's right on that as well?
Yeah. And I'll buy dinner for everyone if I'm wrong. I've been right up to now.
So you said, let's go back to where we started. You said you've been politically consistent, the views that you held 30, 40 years ago, the views that you hold today. You're a serious politician, you're a campaigning politician. What on earth were you doing on Big Brother in that leotard?
Well, I was in the leotard because it was a food task, and if I had refused to climb into the leotard, which, believe me, I was sorely tempted to refuse, everyone would have gone
the producers of Big Brother get you to compromise in a way that no other political leader has ever managed to.
Well, I did Big Brother for 3 reasons. First of all, I wanted to raise a substantial amount of money for the Palestinian refugees in Gaza. And believe me, there's not a queue of people doing that. And we succeeded in that. We doubled the amount of charity money. Mine went to the refugees in Gaza. And I can assure you they're quite glad that I did it. The second reason was to use my fee to become the MP with the biggest constituency staff in the country, which is what I am. I've got 6 people working full-time for me, and they're the best educated. I've got 2 first-class Oxford degrees amongst them, and I financed that considerably out of the fee that I got from Big Brother. And the third reason was to reach a bigger and wider audience than ever I had reached before, and any politician really reached before. And to be honest, it's worked. I walked out of the Big Brother house and got a national radio show, which I've presented now for more than a year. It has a fantastic level of listeners. It's breathing down the neck of Radio 5 with all the BBC's resources, and it's FM and so on. We're AM. It's only a couple of thousand listeners away from Radio 5 Live on that slot. The figures have increased by 109% in the last 3 months. I got that gig straight off the Big Brother. When I go to speak somewhere, my audiences are now much bigger. My books sell better. People know me. People ask for the picture to be taken with me. Kids that don't know any other politicians come after me in the street to get their picture with me. So, I'm sorry, it was the right thing to do. Now, everybody makes a fool of themselves for a good cause. Jeremy Vine asked me the same question you did. And I had to remind him that I'd seen him dressed up in S&M gear for children in need.
You haven't seen me do that.
People do.
I mean, in the privacy of my own living room, S&M gear, yeah, but children in need, no. But just listening to that answer, it's all about me.
No, it's about the Palestinian refugees in Gaza.
Yeah, but the last bit of it, people want the photographs taken with me. Well, would you, if I thought I want to open this up, would you also say that part of you is quite a sizable ego?
Well, 2/3 of my answer were about other people. The Palestinian refugees in Gaza.
Yeah, I was just talking about the last part.
Yeah, the Palestinian refugees in Gaza and my constituents, who are the ones that benefit from the 6 staff, not me. The third one is about me, but it's about my ideas. I'm not trying to reach people in order to sell them shaving foam. I'm trying to reach them in order to persuade them.
You'd be a bloody lousy advert for that.
Maybe. Good point. Appreciate it. I'm trying to reach them to persuade them of my political views. So I'm an evangelist in that sense. The real problem for the people who don't like me is I'm actually not bad at it.
George Galloway, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Tanya has the microphone. Questions? Yes, the lady here in the green.
Yes. Hi, George.
Hi.
Lebanese.
So I can't hear that.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Yes, Lebanese journalist. George, I've known you for many years and I'm very well acquainted with your ideas. And also know the area quite well, and I was wondering, what do you think is the immediate future and sort of vis-a-vis the refugees in Lebanon? Of course, you know that in Lebanon we cannot afford to have the refugees stay in Lebanon because of the composition of the country, because of many events. But also I'm interested in your ideas on the militancy, the Islamic militancy that the area is doing, which is quite bad for the area. And I would contribute this like you did.
Yes, I'll repeat it. I'll summarize it.
No, is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question is, how do you see the future of the area vis-a-vis the militancy and the radicalism as such?
Well, I should first say that I am not an Islamist. I don't support the Islamists. I don't want the Muslim world to follow the path of the Islamists. I support Arab nationalism. I support President Nasser. I support Yasser Arafat. I support the secular Arab nationalist progressive politics. That's what I wanted to succeed all along. It's now one by one being destroyed. And the reason it's being destroyed is because of the failure of Arab nationalism to succeed, to deliver its goals. And now the only show left in town is God. The only show that's left in town for the Muslims is a turn to God, to the parties of God. They're doing so because all the Arab nationalist leaders have failed to liberate their countries, failed to progress their countries, failed to liberate Palestine, and now people are turning to the Islamists, some of whom are more extreme than others. We shouldn't class them all as exactly the same. Lebanon has paid a very high price for the presence of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees in the country, and it's paying it again today. In the north, in Tripoli, where there's tremendous bloodshed, potential to destabilize the country, make it even more fractured than it is. It's the U-turn that I was trying to execute. We need to recognize the centrality of the Palestinian question and start acting for the Palestinians and against Israel. We need to withdraw from the occupations that we're already in. And here's the one I would have liked to got to, but I spoke too long. We must stop propping up the puppet presidents and the corrupt kings that rule the Muslim world almost without exception from one end to the other. I had an adjournment debate last night on Musharraf, who was called by Mr. Blair in November of last year, so just over 6 months ago, a model for the Muslim world to follow. 6 months later, he sacked the Chief Justice, he's firing on unarmed demonstrators, his forces are firing into TV stations, killing journalists, disappearing people, throwing people in dungeons, and he's about to be overthrown, and if we're very unlucky, he'll be overthrown by the Islamists, who will then have a nuclear bomb.
Sorry, but allow me to say this.
Go on, quick.
Many people in the Arab world would much prefer to have the corrupt leaders that they have today and not to have the fundamentalist al-Qaeda.
Yeah, you're right.
I can assure you.
You're right. There's three possibilities: the Arab nationalist progressive potential, the Al-Qaeda Islamist potential, and the status quo. Some people in the Arab world, maybe you're one of them, would prefer the latter if that's the choice. I'm not one of those. If you ask me, do I want Nasser or someone like Nasser or Mubarak or the Muslim Brotherhood to come to power in Egypt, I say, number one, I prefer somebody like Nasser. If we can't have him, let's have the Muslim Brotherhood. I'd say, give me the Muslim Brotherhood rather than Mubarak, because Mubarak is a slave and he has looted the country.
Slave to who?
Slave to the West, to the United States. The Muslim Brotherhood are an example of an Islamist formation that are not Al-Qaeda. The Muslim Brothers in Egypt are not Al-Qaeda.
Okay. We may come back to you if there's... I want to open it up. Sorry, gentleman at the back there.
My name's Tim Finesse. Assuming you wouldn't like to see the Ba'athist regime still in power in Baghdad, how would you have chosen to overthrow them?
Well, it's none of your business to overthrow them. That's the first and most fundamental point. It's very revealing that you pose the question in that way.
I
Yeah, but nobody has the right to overthrow somebody else's regime. For a start, it's illegal, which is why we had to pretend that that's not what we were doing it for. Secondly, it's almost certainly going to be counterproductive, which is exactly what it's turned out to be. If you say to me that we're better off now than we were when the Ba'ath were in power in Iraq, I'd say you obviously don't have a TV. It's absurd to claim that it's better. So, nobody gave us the right to invade other people's countries to change their regimes. In fact, it's illegal under our law and under international law to do so. Now,
is that an absolute principle? That you can never overthrow anyone's regime, no matter what is going on inside that country?
No, it's not an absolute
cleansing?
No, it's not an absolute principle. But it's an absolute...
You made it seem an absolute principle in answer to that question.
It's an absolute principle that no one country or two countries, as in the case of Iraq, can unilaterally decide to invade somebody's country to overthrow their regime. In matter of fact, at Nuremberg, we said that that was the ultimate war crime. That's the making of aggressive war, unilaterally, as Hitler did, by invading other countries. Now, if the United Nations Security Council had decided that Iraq was in breach of its international obligations and that the existence of this breach was a danger to world peace, it would have been possible to construct a legal case for the invasion of Iraq. However, once the invasion had taken place, it would have been proved wrong because it turns out that Iraq was not in breach of its international obligations. A point often elided by the spokesmen who make that point. When Iraq was found not to have any weapons of mass destruction, it was not, therefore, in breach of any United Nations resolution. So, it would have been legal, but it would have been wrong. In Yugoslavia, if, and I have a chapter on this in my book, I say this, if an internal situation in a country is so severe that the problems are spilling over into other countries, then undoubtedly the people in that region, in our case Europe, have a right to have a say and to take certain actions to stop that problem spreading. But, number one, you have to be honestly evaluating the problem and not making it up. Second, the cure has got to be better than the disease. In other words, you mustn't do something that's going to make it worse than the problem. Third, it must be done by international agreement, in the first case amongst European powers, and it must be lawful, it must be legal, and it must never be a unilateral decision to invade another country, which is exactly what it was under Iraq.
Go on.
So you didn't really get to the heart of what I was trying to get at, which is that if you accept that Ba'ath's regime deserves to be removed from power,
No, but I don't.
whatever means,
No, but I don't.
I'm not making the assumption that it has to
Yeah.
be military intervention.
Yeah.
Which from the menu of policy options, from
Yeah, but we have a different.
military intervention,
Okay, I understand your question, but we have a different premise. We have.
those would you deem
Well,
most desirable?
but we have a different premise. I don't accept that the Ba'ath regime had to be removed in Iraq, although I long opposed it. I opposed it when Britain and America were its best friend. I used to demonstrate against it when British ministers and businessmen were going in and out through the demonstration into the embassy to do business with it. I opposed it from the 1970s. But I don't accept that it had done anything that required us unilaterally or frankly through the United Nations, as it now turns out that it was not in breach, to remove it. It would have been far better if we had not removed it. This is the point you're one day going to have to swallow. It would have been far better if we had not removed it. Saddam would have died like all men die. Change would have come internally through political struggle in Iraq, which I long supported. I was backing the Iraqi communists in Iraq against the Ba'ath when they were in exile, when they were underground, when they had an armed militia. I support internal political change in countries. I don't support external invasion of other countries in order to change them.
Was the first Gulf War justified?
No, but it was much more justified than the second
No,
one.
I didn't ask that. I said, was it justified?
No.
No?
No.
But the Abbasids had no right to invade another country. You said you've got no right to topple any regime.
No. Iraq has the
invaded
same
Kuwait.
relationship to Kuwait as the Republic of Ireland has to the 6 counties. The 6 counties of Northern Ireland was stolen from Ireland. Kuwait was stolen from Iraq.
In the United
Everybody
Nations.
knows that. Every Arabist in the Foreign Office will tell you the same thing. Every history book will tell you the same thing. Now, does it follow that I think Iraq was right to invade?
Just
no.
on the principle that you've outlined.
I opposed it. I opposed it at the time. I made speeches denouncing it at the time.
So therefore they were right to try to help Kuwait get its sovereignty back. It was a member of the United Nations.
Yeah, definitely we were right to help Kuwait get its sovereignty back. And the Kuwaiti...
So that justifies the first Gulf War, sorry?
No, because that wasn't the only option with which to do it.
What, nice letters to Saddam Hussein saying,
No.
please, Saddam Hussein, could you withdraw
No.
back to...
No, there should have been an Arab solution, just as there should have been a European solution to Kosovo and Bosnia. There should have been an Arab solution
Sorry,
to
there
the
was an Arab
Kuwait
solution.
crisis.
There was an Arab solution. The Arabs were supported. The move to get...
Yeah, but Britain and America and other countries bombed Iraq back into the Stone Age and indeed announced that they were going to do so in advance. That was not necessary in order to get Iraq out of Kuwait. Huge numbers of children, old people, sick people died in hospitals that were cut off and were then sanctioned.
Terrible things happen in war, but...
Okay,
I just wanted to establish whether you thought it was...
The invasion of Kuwait was entirely wrong. It should never have happened. I'm just trying to put in context to you that it would be like the Republic of Ireland invading the 6 counties in order to take them back. It's not something that came out of nowhere. It's not something that was irrational. It's been the policy of every Iraqi government since the kings of the 1930s to get Kuwait back, because they regard, and rightly so in my view, Kuwait was carved out of Iraq precisely so that it could be a tiny little potency that we would steal the oil wealth for, whereas Iraq would have been a much bigger and more powerful country, and we didn't want that.
Okay, we'll leave that one hanging. Yeah, gentleman there. Sorry, can you say who you are, because you've been recording it all, I noticed, and I just wonder what you're recording it for.
Polish news agency. My name is Andres with NCI. I wanted to ask you whether you see Iraq surviving as one unitary country, and what would be the consequences of disembarking this country into 3 units. And also, second question, what would be, how do you read US policy versus Iran?
Well, these are 2 very big
those are big
questions.
questions.
It might be better answering the first one first and maybe leave the Iranian one till later if we can. Well, if Iraq doesn't survive as one country, we've all got even more problems than we think we've got at this moment. Having said that, I don't think that the Kurdish part of Iraq will ever return to the Iraqi state. In fact, I used to argue with the Iraqi leadership that they should allow Iraqi Kurdistan to go free because it was already de facto free. It was an area where the Iraqi didn't run. It would confound their enemies who were using the Kurdish question utterly cynically, as we discovered this week when the Turkish army began bombing Kurds in the north of Iraq. Heard that before. The best thing to do would be to acknowledge that the Kurdish people didn't want to be a part of Arab Iraq and should be allowed to go free. And I don't think they'll ever come back. But if Iraq breaks into a Sunni and Shia country, with the Kurdish area going free, the potential for a war like you can't even imagine in your worst nightmare then exists. Because the Sunni part of the country will have almost no oil, perhaps none at all. If the Kurds take Kirkuk and the Shiites take the south, then the Sunnis will have no oil at all, unless there's some yet unfound, and they'll fight. And if they fight, Iran will enter the war on behalf of its co-religionists, the Arabs, maybe not the regimes, but many, many people from the Arab countries will enter the war on behalf of their co-religionists, and on top of the world's biggest oil fields, we'll have a Yugoslavia times 10. And you won't be able to buy petrol in Britain at 200 pounds a gallon, never mind a pound a litre that we've got at the moment. My belief is that most Iraqis don't want to break up their country. I can honestly tell you, and I walked freely in Iraq, I was one of the few people who did. I never yet met an Iraqi who told me that they were a Shiite or a Sunni. There are huge numbers of Iraqis who are intermarried or who are not that religious at all. To be honest, the Iraqis weren't very religious people before all this. They certainly are religious now. Another triumph. The overwhelming feeling amongst them, as was shown during the Iran-Iraq war between 1980 and 1988, is that they were Iraqis first and Shiites second, Sunnis second. But of course, all bets are off now, and the mass murder that's going on, people cutting each other's throats and throwing each other's bodies in the rivers, if it continues like this, the breakup of the country must be a very real prospect, with all the consequences that I'm envisaging.
I'm going to park the Iran question because I think it's such a huge question that I'm sure there are other people who want to get in. Oh, yeah.
Well, Speaker Iraq, my name is Art Israel Chan from the States living in London. I actually have a huge amount of appreciation and sympathy for a lot of things you say. I don't necessarily agree with all positions. I particularly like you grilling with the U.S. Congress. That was
It was a good day for me.
I have a question about credibility. Again, a lot of the things you say make a lot of sense, and you're very on the money. But every once in a while, you'll say something that's just kind of seems really off the wall, and it really calls into question.
Give it time.
Give me an example. What has been the wackiest thing he said tonight?
And it's not, it's 1%. So even tonight, for example, there was the issue of the whole tutu on the TV show. It goes to your credibility. And something you said...
That wasn't a tutu. It was a leotard. Don't make it worse.
You said, defenseless and unarmed Palestinians.
Yeah.
Defenseless, possibly debatable. Unarmed, I don't think that's debatable. We do have images of armed Palestinians on that same TV you're talking about. And it's those occasional things that just really call into question the credibility. What's your perspective on credibility and how you relate to it and how you...
Well, you came here to hear me tonight, so I'm obviously credible enough for you to waste your time this evening. And believe me, I'd never speak to less than a full hall anywhere. So if credibility is measured by the number of people who want to hear what you've got to say, I'm doing fine. No, I don't think you came here just to be entertained, though I hope to be entertaining. There's nothing wrong with being entertaining. There's nothing I mean, I could come here and bore you to death, but I don't think I've done that. Now, actually, the example you give, if you just think about it, is not at all wacky. The Palestinian refugee population, first of all, the occupied population, let's deal with them first. Until Oslo, from 1967, until the return of the Palestinian Authority, was completely unarmed. Completely and utterly unarmed. But it was under the iron heel of a very heavily armed illegal occupation. I know because I travelled widely under it. So you had all the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza with no weapons, no militia, no ability to defend themselves, but were crushed under the weight of that occupation. Outside, it's true, the Palestinians had Kalashnikovs, but they were up against F-16s and helicopter gunships and all the paraphernalia that America has given the Israeli armed forces. Now that might not be literally unarmed, but it's as good as unarmed because you've got a pea shooter against an F-16. So the example you give isn't wacky or off the wall. My position is clear. I'm not pretending to be objective here. I'm with the Palestinians. From 1975 until now 2007, I've given actually most of my political life's blood on this cause, much more than Iraq and for much longer than Iraq. And so I'm not objective, I'm not dispassionate, I'm not even-handed. I believe that the Palestinian people have suffered one of the greatest crimes of the 20th century, now stretching into the 21st, and worse, we've added insult to the injury by blaming them, the victims, rather than blaming the people who caused it in the first place.
Yes, the lady there.
My name's Jennifer Wallace. Mr. Galloway, I'm a huge admirer, and I really, everything you said this evening.
Oh, don't tell him that.
But I just wanted to put...
I knew there was a buck coming.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to put to you a criticism that of you that I hear very often, usually when I'm defending people, and that is that you don't spend a lot of time with your constituents, that you aren't very concerned about people who live in your constituency. I don't actually live there, so this is just something that's probably to me. But I wondered whether the employment of 6 people, full-time workers in your constituency, was partly your response to that personal absence yourself, or how you want to defend yourself.
Well, thanks for that. I've only been the MP for 2 years, and these 6 were employed more than a year ago, so it's not really a response in that sense. But undoubtedly, if you have as many obligations as me to, and I could show you my diary, to speak around the country as the most prominent national leader in respect, trying to build a party, and clearly you need to invest in constituency workers in order to make sure your constituents get the best service. I'm in my constituency every day. I live in it, my office is in it, so it cannot possibly be said that I'm not in my constituency enough. I'm in it every day. I'm in Parliament every day, because another criticism is that I'm not in Parliament enough. But in fact, if you Google it, you'll find that I've made more speeches in this Parliament than almost any backbencher in the Parliament. So it's another canard. The best way to test it is what the people in the constituency think. Now, 12 weeks after I came out of the Big Brother house, there were local elections in my constituency. And we defeated the Labour mayor, the Labour deputy mayor, the Labour leader, the Labour deputy leader, the Labour housing chairman, the Labour deputy housing chairman. I could go on, but I'd bore you. We gutted the entire Labour Party 12 weeks after the Big Brother controversy. And our party is growing like Topsy in Tower Hamlets, so we must be doing something right.
Do you think it's important, the relationship between an MP and a constituents?
I really do. And I've been elected 5 times to Parliament. I've never been defeated. I announced before the last election that I would not be standing in the constituency again. So I'll retire undefeated. Every election has been against the odds. As you kindly mentioned, I defeated Roy Jenkins, one of the biggest figures in British politics. I was re-elected in 1992 after a bitter deselection
So you're
battle.
definitely not going to stand again at the next election?
Not in this constituency. I might stand somewhere else.
Where?
Well, I'm keeping that under my hat at the moment. It's under consideration.
Well, I'm guessing it's not going to be Tunbridge Wells or somebody like, well, somewhere like that. So where are you looking at?
Honestly, I can't say it now, but there are a number of possibilities. I've been seen in the Blackburn area quite a lot recently, but that's not a final decision by any means. I'm going to stand for the European Parliament, again, as I did last time, in 2009, which is an all-London constituency. So if you live in London, you'll have the chance to vote for me or against me in June of 2009, if I'm still alive. But I might stand somewhere else, but I promised the people in Bethnal Green and Bow that I would stand only once, and I'm keeping my promise.
Right, any more questions? Yeah, go.
I was wondering if you could just speak to the intervention question we're talking about. Is there any situation in a totally internal conflict where genocide is being committed, or the international community decides it's genocide, that you would consider intervention as justified, given it's a internal conflict?
Yeah. What I did was I outlined, not as well verbally as I have done in a chapter in my book on this. I said there were important principles. First of all, you have to honestly describe the problem. You can't make it up. You can't call something genocide when it isn't genocide. There was no genocide in Kosovo. That was a gigantic lie. in Kosovo, something like 2,700 bodies have been found, and nobody even knows who killed them or whether they're Albanians or Serbs. There was a fantastic propaganda offensive to persuade us that there was genocide going on in Kosovo. There was not. There was repression in Kosovo. There was a civil war beginning in Kosovo because the separatist guerrillas of the Kosovo Liberation Army launched a war to free their land from Serbia, which seems, thanks to George Bush's statement in Albania the other day, to be coming to pass. So you must honestly describe it, not invent it. Secondly,
there were an awful lot of journalists who were there, who saw ethnic cleansing, who saw people terrified for their lives, who were fleeing.
I think that's right. There was people fleeing and terrified, but there was not genocide.
There was ethnic cleansing. There was ethnic cleansing. And
there was ethnic cleansing. There was ethnic cleansing.
And would you accept there was genocide in Bosnia?
No. There was large-scale killing, much larger scale.
Srebrenica
was mass murder, but it wasn't genocide. Genocide. No. Well, look, genocide has a legal. Genocide has a legal meaning. It means that someone is attempting to wipe out an entire people, not because of anything they've done, but because of who they are. No. There was a civil war in Yugoslavia. There was a civil... please. We can shout at each other.
I'll tell you what, let this lady have the microphone.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite an important point. And you go and make your argument.
Yeah.
Right, I'm Bosnian actually, so I think I have the right to speak up for Srebrenica.
Of course you do. Everybody has a right.
Of course, but do you not agree? I mean, recently there was a judgment on Srebrenica, and the judgment was passed that there was a genocide in Srebrenica. The intention, and indeed all the actions, proved that the intention of Serb authorities was to wipe out the Muslim population of Srebrenica.
No, I don't accept it. What I described it to John a minute ago was that it was mass murder. And I described it in the House of Commons. Please, you asked the question, let me answer it. It was an act of mass murder, murder most foul. No, I'm not saying it now, I said it at the time in Parliament. You can look it up in Hansard. I said at the time that the valleys of Srebrenica are running with blood from an act of mass murder. But that's not genocide. Genocide is, for example, when Hitler decided, as a matter of policy, to industrially remove every Jew from the face of the earth. That's the difference between mass murder and genocide. Now, if I was to accept your definition of genocide, then the Lebanese suffered a genocidal attack by Israel. It was a foul attack. It was a murderous attack, but it was not a genocidal attack. It was not an attack to wipe the Lebanese people off the face of the earth. Now, you're Bosnian, I understand how sensitive it is to you, but the rest of us who are not Bosnian cannot be lured into propaganda words that will lead us to... No, it is a propaganda word, genocide. There's only been one genocide in the lifetime of the people in this room. And that was the genocide against the Jews carried out by fascism in the 1930s and 40s. No. There have been lots of other acts of mass murder. There have been lots of other acts of mass murder committed by people against their own people, like Cambodia. The Cambodians were killing Cambodians in large numbers. It's a logical absurdity, what you say. For Cambodians to want to wipe out all the Cambodians is a logical absurdity. There was mass murder in Cambodia. There was not an attempt to end the existence of all Cambodians. So we've got to get the terms right. It's got to be worse. The cure has got to be better than the illness. In other words, your intervention mustn't make things worse. There must be international consensus behind the intervention, and it must be lawful. It cannot be unilateral or bilateral outside of international law. These are the principles that I've outlined in my book, and better than I'm saying it here, that must guide us about the very rare occasions when we can intervene in other people's affairs. What we cannot do, cannot have, is one leader or two leaders deciding that they're going to invade other people's countries because they don't like that regime. which is what we had in Iraq.
Okay, someone hasn't asked a question. Yeah, the gentleman there and the gentleman at the back. Wait. Let this guy here.
Mr. Galloway, name is Kavi. I'm one of your long-time supporter.
Yes.
Tell me, how do you see this obsession of the Anglo-Saxons, the English-speaking people, to change, reorder the international system to their advantage? And do you see ever an end to this mistake of that we are the chosen people, we have a manifest destiny to teach the rest of the world the benefits of the civilization as we know it in this country?
Okay.
Well, it may be because I'm neither an Anglo or a Saxon that I never got this. Once I came home and told my Irish grandfather that the teacher had said that Britain had an empire so vast that on it the sun never set. And my grandfather answered, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. And I never had any cause to doubt that. And I think that's the fundamental problem. And all sorts of people, including quite liberal people, haven't shaken off that mentality that we have, as your words, a manifest destiny to order the affairs of the world. We don't. George Orwell, in his first book, Burmese Days, written from the standpoint of a colonial official as he was when he wrote it, he's chatting up a girl and he's talking to her about imperialism, which you might think is an odd chat-up line. He said, when all's said and done, imperialism is about going to other people's countries and stealing their things. And that's what it's always been about, and it's what it is now. They wrap it up in Christian clothes in the past, or humanitarian clothes now, but in the end, as Orwell said, it's about going to other people's countries and stealing their things. Tutu famously said, they taught us to pray with our eyes closed, and when we opened them, they'd stolen the country from all around us. That's my honest belief. There's all sorts of people, including quite liberal people, some of whom might be in this audience, who might otherwise agree with many of the things I'm saying, are still possessed in their hearts of the belief that somehow somebody gave us a mission, maybe even God, gave us a civilizing mission to go around the world reordering things. We don't have that right. In fact, our exercising of it has caused us a lot of trouble, and we better shake ourselves out of it before we get ever deeper into that trouble.
Can I just tell you that...
I tell you what, we're running short on time.
Just briefly, this was...
Well, hang on.
The US...
Go make your point. You're being heard without a microphone.
Security strategy statement, which appeared last March. Exact words that I quoted.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Right, gentlemen...
James Stewart from the Six Counties. I believe passionately, as you do on your issues, that it's quite wrong for rogue leaders to be able to make misery and slaughter within their own countries while the rest of the world stands by. And I'm thinking of the Vietnamese going into Cambodia and the Tanzanians going into Uganda. I'm not sure either of those would have passed your 4 tests. Are you really saying that Pol Pot and Idi Amin should have been allowed to stay in post until Anadolmai brought up?
Well, the point is, Vietnam was the neighbor of Cambodia. Vietnam was suffering massively as a result of what was occurring in Cambodia. Tanzania was the neighbor of Uganda. Britain and America are not the neighbor of Iraq. They're not even actually the neighbor of Yugoslavia, but at least they're closer than they are to Iraq. My point is that these solutions should be regional, where there is a case for an intervention, but that the interventions must pass these tests. Now, I'm absolutely convinced that the Cambodian intervention by Vietnam would have passed the tests. I'm not convinced that the Idi Amin regime would have passed the test. The governments of Uganda, both before and after Idi Amin, have been, by and large, not very good governments that have repressed their opponents, killed people willy-nilly. They have had leaders that looted their country. I don't think, actually, now looking back on it, that beyond being unbelievably grotesque and buffoonish, that Idi Amin was very different from many of the other leaders, both in Africa as a whole and in Uganda specifically. But in the case of Cambodia, I hope you don't imagine that I supported the regime in Cambodia. I supported the regime in Vietnam all my life and until now. In fact, I was an activist to bring it to power. The Vietnamese had every right to intervene in Cambodia because the impact of the mass slaughter that was going on in Cambodia was extremely dangerous and destabilizing, not just to Cambodians but to the Vietnamese. And the Cambodians were actually attacking Vietnam. They were attacking the Vietnamese armed forces before the Vietnamese entered the country.
One last question. Who wants to ask the last question? Yes.
I'm interested, you say that there shouldn't be interference in other countries. Do you think therefore there should be punishment for people that do? And do you think that Tony Blair should face some form of war trial?
I do, and I see that Cherie Blair has expressed some anxiety. At least he'll have a good lawyer. That this might gather steam. I'm absolutely clear that, for example, Henry Kissinger is the greatest living mass murderer on the planet. Henry Kissinger murdered people from Chile, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, East Timor, Indonesia, the Middle East. But he's not facing any kind of trial. He's called doctor, even though he isn't a doctor, and given large sums of money to give after-dinner speeches. He will never be brought to trial, and neither will George Bush or Tony Blair ever be brought to trial. Trial is for the losers. Trial is for the small-time tin pot tyrants, like Milosevic, like Saddam Hussein. The big tyrants, if I can close on a quotation that I like to use, from St. Augustine, because as you know from the Daily Record, I'm a Catholic. St. Augustine wrote a book called City of God. In it, he describes an encounter between Alexander the Great and a pirate captain. Ordering the pirate to halt, Alexander demands, "How dare you terrorize these waters as a thief?" And the pirate answers, "How dare you terrorize the entire world? You with your great navy can call yourself an emperor and call other men as you please." That's the world we've got today. It's the world under Alexander the Great. It's the world under George W. Bush, and he ain't no Alexander the Great. That they call themselves the international community. That happens all the time on the news, not with John Sopel, he's too smart. But people talk about the West when they're talking about Britain and America, which leaves out rather a lot of the West. They talk about the international community when in fact they're talking about a self-appointed small section of the international community. They appoint themselves as emperors, and they give themselves the right to call other men as they please. Rogue states, failed states, dictators, though only some dictators have to go. Others will not only sell weapons to keep, but will even give them a bung of £1 billion in order to keep them in power. Thank you very much. George Galloway.